headlines. New scanners to boost port security. Final lineup set for Panorama 2025. Gas leak forces wesn secondary evacuation. TTAHI offers secure parking for Carnival, and internationally, South African court dismisses white genocide claims. Now for the details. 2 high-tech mobile scanners were officially commissioned at the Port of Port of Spain Tuesday, the 25th of February, with 2 more set to be installed at the Port of Point Lisas soon. Works and Transport Minister Rohan Sinanan says the $12.9 million U.S. investment will enhance national security, increasing container inspections in Port of Spain from 25% to 75%. The stage is set for the grand finale of Panorama 2025, taking place this Saturday at the Queen's Park Savannah. Phase 2 Pan Groove will open the show, while last year's champions, BP Renegades, will close. Republic Bank Exodus, which topped the preliminary and semi-finals, will perform 6th. Students and staff at wesn Secondary School in La Brea were forced to evacuate this morning after detecting a gas leak on the compound. Emergency services, including police and Heritage Petroleum personnel, responded. No injuries were reported and investigations are ongoing. The Trinidad and Tobago Association for the Hearing Impaired will open its Ryson Road compound for Carnival Monday and Tuesday, parking at $100 per day. The funds will support TTAHI's initiatives, including plans for an inclusive preschool. To promote hearing safety, drivers will receive free earplugs, and public hearing screenings will be held on March 6th and 7th. Internationally, a South African court has ruled that claims of a white genocide are imagined and not real, rejecting a $2.1 million bequest to a white supremacist group. The case, tied to false narratives promoted by former U.S. President Donald Trump and Elon Musk, underscores ongoing racial tensions and misinformation. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
Attention everyone! The Office of the Prime Minister Communications has launched a brand new WhatsApp channel designed to keep you informed and connected like never before. Get real-time updates, breaking news, and important information directly from the source. With our WhatsApp channel, you'll always know what's happening when it's happening. Joining is easy. Use your phone camera, scan this QR code, tap follow, and that's it. You're in. Be sure to tap the notification bell to never miss an update. Stay informed, stay empowered. Join the conversation with the Office of the Prime Minister Communications WhatsApp channel today.
WESN.
Seemingly gone are the days where a carnival band has its costumes built by a team of people in a workshop that looks like the greatest local arts and craft location you've ever seen. Now apparently it's outsourced, and it leads to the generic nature of, beads and feathers, bikini masks. And the Prime Minister has decided to speak out against it for a consideration that I guess many of us may have taken for granted to some extent or another. And that is, of course, what he describes as the absolute foolishness with regards to the foreign exchange used to buy carnival costumes. And like I said, we're talking about beads and feather masks. So to what extent are we importing costumes as opposed to elaborate bikinis for a street party? And I guess for the men, swim trunks in the right color. The issue of that statement, though, is the fact that I do believe, and this is not necessarily a Keith Rowley situation, because this is a long-term thing with regards to how the commercialization of carnival has progressed. But one of the things I don't know to what extent it contributes to the situation is our labor market, because our labor market is unhealthy. We're in a labor market where the unions ask for more wages, driving inflation, but more importantly, government hiring practices impacted the labor market, causing the private sector to some extent to also have to increase their wages, causing, when you could get a government job where you, in many cases, in too many cases, you're barely doing anything, then the private sector would probably have to pay more to attract workers, depending. And some private sector businesses will do it, some won't, some can't. But the point is it unbalances the labor market, and I do think it contributed to some extent pushing wages unnecessarily, because then it sparks inflation, and all of a sudden those wages no longer are luxury, they're a necessity. So to what extent is our labor market so unhealthy that it makes manufacture of carnival costumes prohibitive in TNT? Because to some extent, I'm not entirely sure how much you could automate something like a carnival costume. So to some extent, I do wonder if, you know, it's still going to be very labor intensive. And one country's labor costs and what is a reasonable wage does not equate across the board. It's far more complicated than that. So there are, and that's assuming it's not sweatshop labor, but there are circumstances where, look, it's just cheaper for the labor in country X because their economy is different, and between foreign exchange and blah, 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 it will go a long way. In order to not reach this point, we needed to have foresight as a society, and our leaders needed to look at the problem and help guide us to a solution, as opposed to complaining about it now. And again, to some extent, it's not as though Keith Rowley was Prime Minister 30 years ago, but he was a minister or a member of Parliament for longer than he has been Prime Minister. So one could argue he would have at least had influence on the situation in advance. Now, to what extent he would have had the political capital to spend, that could be debated. But this is just an example where if you allow a society to kind of do things that don't seem so bad at first, it can compound itself, and then you reach the point where, oh my gosh, we're spending how much foreign exchange on what? Now, the whole business model of Carnival, it is allowed to be what it is. To what extent it needs to be regulated or changed, to what extent that is ethical or not. It has now reached the point where you could argue the debate potentially has gotten out of hand. Not the situation, although the situation might be getting there too. But it's gotten out of hand where now we have, it's not unethical that big mass bands are doing this. But we do have to look at our foreign exchange bill, and now we're in this awkward spot of how do we do anything about it if we've determined that we can. What can we do about it? It's potentially another case of trying to secure the barn after the horse has bolted out of the stable. What's the point? You know? Who cares if we close the door now? Horse is already gone. We need to now put the extra effort in to track down this horse. And heavens forbid if it literally is the only horse we have, because then we had to try and catch it on foot. Good luck with that. And all too often, that's what seems to be the case in TNT. The one horse in whatever situation we have bolts out the door, and now we have to spend all of the extra effort going after it on foot. Or the guy has to use a vehicle and hope that the horse didn't go somewhere where our vehicle cannot follow. It's one of the reasons why people at times still use horses. But also, the Prime Minister apparently is not looking to reveal his retirement date. And the thing is, we're coming close to the time when the expectations start, I guess you could say. No one expected him, based on what he said, that he would retire in February. But once March hits, all of a sudden, we're waiting, we're watching, at the very least to see how all of this unfurls. Because the PNM is going slightly into no man's territory. Yes, I know that they have done things like selected a prime minister and a political leader or opposition leader, not so much political leader, but opposition leader, without a vote, an internal vote. But now we're going into a situation where the regime is trying to change leadership in order to have a smooth transition. And we're not entirely sure if everybody is on board with said smooth transition. So this is one of those things where it could amount to nothing, or it could amount to everything. So, get your popcorn ready. Worst case scenario, you have popcorn if, it fizzles out and there's nothing to see. But who knows, maybe there will. And it will just be the first time where we may or may not have something to see. Because this whole transition has multiple breakpoints where the situation could break down. And I guess to some extent the Prime Minister wanting to hold the date that he will leave the post of Prime Minister close to the vest is a further indication of this. If the whole situation was on a solid foundation, they wouldn't need to do all of this that they've done with regards to, oh, well, it's Stuart. Oh, wait, people didn't understand what it meant that it's going to be Stuart. Oh, we have to make deals, and we have to, oh, we had a consensus, now we don't have a consensus. Oh, we have a consensus again. And even before that with the, well, I will retire, this will be my last term. Did I say that? Did I really say that? And all of these open-ended statements that have no timetable, that has no clear path, even amongst themselves, the initial House of Representatives consensus or caucus did not have a clear explanation, which was an unforced error in my opinion, but it is what it is. Maybe they were trying to pull over the wool over the eyes of their own fellow MPs. Who knows? But the fact of this, all of this secrecy just highlights they are not 100% rock solid on if this will go through smoothly. To some extent, that's because it's unprecedented, to be fair, but we have to wonder to what extent do the internal ambitions also contribute to that? Good luck to you, Mr. Prime Minister. Hopefully, the whole thing doesn't come apart at the seams. And like I said, this is just the first time where that might happen. Now, switching gears before we go into the daily review, I just want to point out, despite all of the warnings of the TTPS, apparently, they say 4 officers, but it's 2 enlisted men in the TNT regiment and 2 Coast Guard. They say officers. Don't know if they'll actually be officers. Anyway, I'm being technical. The point is, after the police on the media ambassadors have been saying alcohol and guns don't mix, you could be having a good time and then you lose your gun and then there's a problem for everybody. Well, apparently one of these 4 men, I believe it was a member of the regiment, or one of them, it doesn't say which one, it doesn't say from which service, lost a 6-aught pistol and his ammunition, so at least 1 clip, while they were bar hopping last Thursday. Now, it says that they want a confidence patrol. I don't know if it was an informal thing in uniform or if they were in civilian wear with their firearms. Point is, they lost the gun. Come on, man. Come on. I think there's also a story about a fake card Facebook marketplace leading to more victims. It's like, I know we have an issue with disseminating information, but even when members of national security fail to get the memo, A, be mindful of your sidearm while engaging in whatever capacity, whether officially or not, in carnival activities. It just really gives you confidence in our national security system, doesn't it? And finally, the whole situation where the court is compelling the office of the commissioner to process FUL applications. Doesn't say grant, but process. It's starting to get ridiculous. Now Junior Benjamin is in the office, and I don't know if there's more, but essentially this has occurred again. Whether it's the same case, different cases, I think it might be more cases now, and it's starting to get ridiculous. What is it about private FUL holders? Is it that the police lack so much confidence in themselves that they're worried about private FUL holders for some strange reason? What is going on with that? I do not understand. Or is it that the commissioners themselves lack confidence in their own judgment? That potentially could be the reason behind the way Erla handled the situation the way she did. Now we have to see how Junior Benjamin will do so, because the courts are saying, hey, this is taking too long, and you're costing the state money because we keep losing these lawsuits by the way, regardless of, and the more you delay without any reasonable explanation these FUL processes, probably the more it's going to cost the state. And here comes the part where I think at some point, if not immediately, but maybe not immediately, the whole agency liability situation, right? You don't necessarily want to breach that willy-nilly, but at some point the commissioner probably should be personally liable for damages incurred to the state based on their poor judgments. Again, DCP Junior Benjamin has not necessarily displayed that yet, and hopefully he won't, but we have to see how things goes. If he does, then it comes to question, okay, what is the overall ongoing policy that apparently is in place that has not been stated and has potentially no basis in law, and should wider lawsuits and greater penalties and payouts from the state happen? All right, we'll try and sneak in one. Let's go straight into today's daily review. And I think one of the things that came out to the Prime Minister's sword turning at Nutrimix, I do believe that might also be where he made the comment about carnival costumes and the foreign exchange. But he also pointed to the fact that, and this is a quote, but for some reason in Trinidad and Tobago we specialize in delays and obstruction. And he was also pointing to the fact that, look, we're going to run out of oil, we need new industries. It is reported, he said, the country urgently needed to build its non-energy sector because existing reserves are being depleted. Okay, so there's a couple of things here. It's low-hanging fruit. One, I'm pretty sure we specialize in delays and obstruction, for the most part, does not mean the private sector, right? For the most part, we ain't talking about the private sector. I'm pretty sure we talk about the public sector when you say things like that. Who is in charge of the public sector when they're in office? I'll give you a hint. Also, we urgently need to build, or the country urgently needed. He's talking past tense now. He's not even talking it's on the horizon, much less it's a situation that's current. No, he's talking then, before we needed to do this, to build its non-energy sector because existing reserves are being repeated. Well, who was in charge for the last 10 years? I'll give you a hint. And when economists and journalists and commentators basically said diversification to the point where it's a meme, it's a trope, it's become a four-letter word in national discourse, right? It has gone to the point where it might lose all its meaning. Who seemingly, based on the decisions they made, did not really want to do anything innovative, significant, or I guess it is showing any sort of courage or leadership with regards to diversification. in the last 9 to 10 years. So I don't understand what you are trying to accomplish by you saying these things now. There may be context with regards to why you made decisions. That would be useful. Not just now, but before, when a lot of people were screaming, we need to diversify, we need to diversify, we need to diversify. How many times we have said that on this show? It would have been useful as a leader to lead us, and part of that is to explain where the limitations might be holding up diversification and what perhaps we could do about it to speed that up. Not come 10 years when you're ready to retire and say, well, this was needed. Now, it's not that simple. I'm oversimplifying the situation to be sure. And we can't necessarily, don't assume the Prime Minister has 100% the power and just unilaterally makes decisions. But still, the diversification one, that is extremely annoying, just based on how the government has treated the conversation of diversification, where it pays lip service to it, and then actions speak louder than words. Lack of actions speak even louder than that. But going back to the first point about the delay and obstruction. Now this, I'll be a little bit more generous to the Prime Minister. You're not going to change the public service overnight. The problem is we didn't see any attempt to make things better, except potentially with Petrotrin, but we have complaints with regards to how that turned out. And then WASA was supposed to be next, but they never got to it. I could understand that it's not going to be easy, but still, it seems as though politicians fear the public sector and trying to make drastic changes that will make significant improvement, because we're long past the point where minor change is going to do anything for us with regards to situations like this. And this ties into all the talk about ease of doing business and all that. This ties into the long lines for you to get your documents, whatever it is, or the stupid waits, or the runarounds, like what happened with Tobago Registrar General Office, which happens in many offices. He pointed it out. The whole thing about don't do today on Friday what you're going to do on Monday. Don't do this week what you're going to do next month. He pointed it out. It is there. I understand that it's not easy, but part of being a leader is giving us the confidence that these things have been identified at a timely timing. Not just identified at some point in the distant future, and when we basically are left to say, well, why didn't you do anything about it? It's identified in a timely manner, and it's either dealt with or an explanation as to why it cannot be dealt with immediately or effectively immediately will be given. But we don't get that. We don't get that level of leadership, because more often than not, and this is a societal problem now, this is a lack of societal will. Because first of all, a lot of the bleeding hearts that don't understand governance are not going to like these changes, and they're going to listen to the unions when they cry, oh gosh, they fired us, and how they could be so heartless. No. Big changes in our government needs to happen in order for our government to tighten up if we want to get our economy back on track. I'm just going to say that out right now. But also, it's a societal problem of, well, we don't know what to say, so just say nothing. That's a big problem in our society. The lack of intelligence with regards to communication. It's a big problem, and it affects how we govern ourselves, how we run our country, and it affects our economy down the line in multiple ways with regards to ineffective leadership. And then that, of course, affects your pocketbook and your ability to afford whatever it is you need to buy. We ain't talking luxury yet, because price of chicken's going up. That's one of the few things that we do produce here in a significant enough capacity. Anyway, the good lady is here, so I'll hit the pause button on that conversation. It is disappointing. But I'll close with this. Make no mistake, I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but I am fairly certain, I'm willing to bet money on this. If there was another party in power, not just the UNC, but many of the other parties, we would hear something similar to this. Let's not think it's unique to the PNM alone. This thinking and this modus operandi right, with regards to diversification and with regards to cleaning up the public sector reform. Let's not think someone will magically come and do what the PNM didn't do. You know, just snap their fingers and a magic spell happens and poof, the public sector is fixed. Yeah, right. We'll take the break. Good lady coming up next. Stay tuned.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for, it's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man
is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this is screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there, next to himself. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have two of the three species of anteaters right here.
Money is something we all deal with, but how many of us truly understand it? What if you could make better decisions with your money? Decisions that secure your future, protect your family, and bring you peace of mind. I'm Darren Jacobs, and I'm here to help you make sense of your dollars. Welcome to Dollars and Cents, the show that breaks down the financial world in ways that matter to you. No jargon, no confusion, just real conversations about money, your money. So join me every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on WESN for Dollars and Cents. And we're back here talking about WSND Content Capital, and the good lady herself, carrying us to share our former blah, 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 has joined me. once again. I know I was like halfway, you know, I want to go through the motions, and I know she wouldn't like it. I just thought, you know, let me just. But with that said, there was a planned significant topic that one of our callers would be very happy to hear. But before that, Karen was listening, watching my last rant. I was trying very hard not for it to be ranty, but the situation, it was just one of those where the emotional response is kind of low-hanging fruit, obvious, hard to deny, difficult to ignore kind of thing. So, well, not ironically, but Karen, you also wanted to weigh in on that wonderful statement.
Yes, actually, I have to congratulate the Prime Minister for his transparency and accountability, because I assume he's talking about his government. He has to be talking about his government. And not doing as he's wont to do, blaming everybody else but them. And how can I say that that is so? Well, let me use some examples. The Gambling Control and Betting Act, which is yet only Part 1 and Part 2 have been proclaimed, and Part 10, which are already of no consequence if you look at the Act, because the licensing regime and enforcement regime has not been put in place, and therefore, in effect, we still have the private members club being allowed to operate as casinos, and it is well known, the UNDP, a number of reports, is known as a major cause of money laundering. And of course, you had the FIU report that said it had 5.9 billion reports of suspicious transactions reports, and a lot of that would have been the money laundering. So then we have the Gambling Commission. Then we talk about the refining. You close it down in 2018, and then suddenly that 101 acres are made up of scrap iron and old and unusable equipment, which in fact was not true, because a large part of that refinery had been rehabilitated, I don't know the technical terms, so I wouldn't try to use them, but certainly it had been done over a number of years. And what is amazing, that all of a sudden you want to sell it, and then you sell it instead of letting the procurement regulator, whose role is transparency, accountability, and value for money. You passed an amendment to the Act in 2015 or 2016, 9 years ago, and the reason why the procurement regulator says she's unsure of her role is because the regulations that govern it have yet to be enacted. But you did pass the regulations for the $1 million to allow it to spend the PS, to spend it without having to go to the regulator. Then there's the National Statistical Institute, the IMF, in their last report spoke about that. And the CSO, I'm not finding fault with the persons who work there. I'm sure they're very hardworking, but they've said it has to be they're underfunded, and they're subject to the Statistical Act, which says all information must be with the approval of the Minister of Finance, and information is not up to date. A lot of it is 2023. Let me talk about the airport. We have an airport billing it for $3 million, when CSO figures shows on average, even Carnival and usual period, it doesn't exist more than 3,000 people coming through the airport in Tobago. Yet you're billing one for 3 million people. Well, I don't know if that's one you've been able to finish. And then we talk about the ballistics and DNA testing. You say you're going to set up a new forensic 10 years later in St. Joseph, funded by the Chinese, when you have a backlog of over 44,000, 33,000 sitting inside waiting to be tested, much less a data bank. Then you talk about, which is reported, on the lack of CCTVs or working CCTVs, the cameras not being, the body cameras, 900 instead of 3,000 that there was promised. The cars, the cemetery of police cars that were pictured in one of the daily newspapers, I think the Sunday newspapers. The OPVs, 4 out of 14 only working. The hostile ships, both of them out of commission. So yes, you are very right to take responsibility. Transfer pricing, you've been talking about it from the beginning. Nothing has happened. So campaign financing is still stuck in GSE since 2020. So yes, you're right, delay. That's correct, and you have to take responsibility for those major ones. But I don't want to spend more time on that. I'm sure I could come up with, and we have to be actually importing fuel from a country that does not have oil. So to hear the Minister of Finance, I mean, how ridiculous can you be to say that we don't have enough crude oil? Well, guess what? Jamaica has zero. And in fact, we have been importing crude oil since Texaco days. It used to be 144,000 barrels per day. By now, it went down to 40,000, but that has been the case for at least the last 10 years. So what are you talking about that for? Would that making sense to you? And then talking about your relationship with Jamaica, it's going on 50 years. You think that making sense to anybody? For the bunkering fuel? It's not making sense, right? So, you know, and the train one that you said it was working wasn't working. I mean, yes, and the mining that you said, knowing that they were breaking the law because the judge gave the order and he gave the son of the person who was a good friend of the Prime Minister on record, giving him a temporary license. Yes, you're right, obstruction and delay. And the ball falls squarely in hand, and I'm glad to see the Prime Minister finally appearing to take responsibility for these delays, of which there are many more, but I didn't come to talk about that. Actually, I came, yes, Sean?
So,
what did I come to talk about?
Noise pollution, and to some extent now, how the law, it is almost laughable / you know, when I say laughable, like literally, it is in a silly way, you know, like a Looney Tunes cartoon, when Yosemite Sam blows himself up or what have you, that we have a situation, or the coyote. We have a situation where it seems as though, and it has already been mentioned by the courts, that the way how our legislative framework is set up for the AMA to police things like noise pollution, it's just not. Essentially, this is my phrasing, or this is how I'm going to put it as a non-lawyer. They have a one-size-fits-all thing to deal with pollution, and it don't really work for noise pollution. Because if it's an oil spill, if the oil spill today, it'll be there tomorrow. It'll be there next week. If we have noise pollution tonight, that don't mean it's going to be, what's noise? It's something that's transient in the moment. It's there and it's gone, right? So the remedies of having a situation and going to court to try and remedy it, well, the effect already happened last night or 2 weeks ago. We're going to court unless I'm going to take someone to civil court to sue them, and that's a whole other kettle of fish. So judges on a previous case about a year and a half ago have already spoken about the poor legislative framework, and Karen is here to do a much better job than me in order to explain what it is I just said.
But the only reason I am here to do, as you put it, I wouldn't say better, I don't want to use that term, but I'm more informed, I don't know, because I am a lawyer, and what really encouraged me to do this, triggered it, was a caller last week, and he really seemed very distressed about the laws, and having done my research on it, I can understand why. And of course, we are in carnival period, where fats are galore all over, and of course the noise levels are going to be beyond normal levels, and many of the areas in which these fats are being held are in residential areas or areas where there are hospitals or schools, well, and so on. So it is very relevant to this. So let me try to break it down as much as I can and as simply as I can. I think let's start with what really is at we have two sets of laws operating, actually more than two, but essentially two sets of law. The law of what they call the tort of nuisance, and that is non-statutory, meaning it's not in legislation. And it's called a nuisance, and there are two categories. There's private nuisance, where you have to be the owner of land, and there's the other person, and you are disturbing their enjoyment, the quiet enjoyment of their property. So, for instance, they're burning black tires, and the blacks will come over on their land. They play loud music at all hours of the day and night, and at very high levels, and also sewage escaping from their property onto your property. So the private nuisance is really founded on ownership of land, and you're disturbing my use of the land. But public nuisance, which is what is the other kind, which is what we are concerned with, is when it affects the general public, and that would be residents of an area, and as I said, certain institutions which require a certain level of quiet. So that's what we're looking at. And under the public nuisance, if you look at public nuisance, one of the remedies, and that's why this is why we're going to switch now soon to the EMA, one of the remedies that you can have is not only an injunction, which requires you to go to court, and by that time, as Sean said, the effect done, right? But what you really want to be able to use, which an immediate remedy, is abatement, which allows you to abate the source of the nuisance, which is stop the music. If you stop the music, I think you stop the effect. Right. So that is what public nuisance, one of the remedies, is not only damages, but the key one is abatement, which allows you to stop the source of the music. So that's nuisance. That's nuisance, and that's governed by the common law. It's public nuisance is both a criminal and a civil wrong, meaning you could go to the, could be fined or imprisoned if you don't pay the fine, or you go to the civil courts where you're looking for compensation. But other things you can look for is damages, and most importantly, and that's what we are concerned with in this period of noise, we're dealing with specifically with noise, is the abatement issue. So what had happened is there was a case, and I would suggest that anybody wants to read up, they would read an article in, I hope I could call out in paper, Newsday, and it said, appeal court calls for legislative changes for noise pollution. Appeal court calls for legislative changes for noise pollution, and Justice Lucky was, I think, the one who delivered the ruling on behalf of the court. Now, what is the problem is that in the Environmental Management Act, sections 49 and 51 talk about pollution, air and noise pollution, not a nuisance. They talk about air and noise pollution. And then they also passed the noise control pollution, noise pollution control rules. And those rules essentially tell you that there are three zones. There is the industrialized zone, there is the entertainment zone, and the general area. Now, we're dealing with the entertainment zone, especially as we're in Carnival. So you can apply to the EMA for variation of the noise levels, because clearly in fets, the music has to be louder, and it can create a nuisance, but it is not short term, I mean, in terms of the hours, but it is still difficult, especially for older people, and they've had evidence given by someone who represents the OSHA, an attorney, showing the impact that the noise does have on a number of people, especially people who are suffering from previous illnesses or older persons. No question about it. So that is an entertainment zone. And you can apply to the EMA for a variation of the noise level, because there are different noise levels. And if you want to go beyond that noise level, you have to make an application. And it was made. And this is the case with Wild Goose. And what happened was that in the case of Wild Goose, the EMA and with the enforcement officers who are also police SRP. Police. Right, so they are also SRPs. What they did is they shut down the party. They shut down the party, and the Wild Goose went to court on what they call a judicial review, meaning that they said that the EMA went beyond their powers given to them under the Act. And they relied on the fact that the relief, which is the enforcement provisions, which you can see at particularly 67 and 68, but 68 in particular, tells you what the EMA could do. And the EMA could get an injunction, the EMA could get an order for compensation, the EMA, let me get it, I want to look at it. The EMA can do a number of things, but what the EMA does not have the power to do is to abate the sound of the noise. If you're looking at the EMA, and instead, since it's the EMA who exercised that power, they went beyond, they acted ultra-virus beyond the powers that they're given under legislation. However, when it went to the Court of Appeal, this is what the, if you read it, it's a very good report actually. When it went to the Court of Appeal, the court did acknowledge that if you're looking at the EMA, yes, they did not have the power to abate the noise, which is to stop the noise, because the enforcement provisions, which are set out in 67, 68 of the Act, or thereabouts, really talk about administrative orders and restraining orders and closure of a facility. And that is a thing, I mean, if you're going through that process, FET done, maybe a year later, who cares, right? So that what you really want is to be able to stop it. But they said, and this is where the court exercised its judicial discretion, but it had a basis upon which to do it. They looked at section 68C, which allowed, I was going to actually pull up that section. I know I have a young man here who can help me with that, who, if you look at section 68C, it allows you, apart from the closure of the facility, administrative order, restraining order, to pursue any other remedy which will be provided by law. And so the court said that was a gateway provision that allowed them now to apply the breach of peace under the Summary Courts Act, which allows the police to arrest, because they are SRPs, the environmental officers are also SRPs, but also she mentioned to allow them to abate the nuisance, and the Public Police Service Act, section 45, where special reserve police can abate, which bring an end to the nuisance. But it's so, what she's saying is that because of that gateway provision that says any other remedy which may be provided by law, that was the escape provision that allowed the EMA to rely on other laws other than what is in the Act. And those other laws included public nuisance under the law of tort. It included the Summary Courts Act, which section 70, which allows them to abate public nuisance, and also section 45 of the Police Service Act. But what the judges are really saying, that is hardly what one wants to do. What you want to do is you need to amend the legislation and make it very clear that in the definition of noise pollution, also included in that definition is public nuisance. And if you do that, then when they breach the variation, which they did breach the variation, they would not be able to say, as they were correct to say, that so far as the EMA was concerned, they had exceeded their jurisdiction. The judges saved the day, that's the Court of Appeal, saved the day by saying, well, you know what, section 68C gives them, she called it a gateway provision, which allowed them to apply any other law. And the any other law was the breach of the peace under the Summary Courts Act, which is a criminal offense, the Police Service Act, section 45, which allows you to, all of these allow you to, and also public nuisance, which allows you to abate the source. So they could not shut down the party, but they could abate the source of the nuisance. So she's saying, and the judges are saying, that the EMA legislation needs to be amended to include public nuisance. And once you do that, once you include public nuisance, it would allow the EMA to shut down, abate the source of the nuisance, which is the loud music, because you have not complied with the variation that you were permitted, and therefore, party done, fet done.
So it causes a situation where I think I'm starting to understand now.
God, you say you're now starting?
I'm now starting to understand why the EMA is like, it's not us. And why the police are like, well, it's not us, it's the EMA. And the EMA is like, it's not us, it's the police. And not saying that they're necessarily right to say that, but there is some, just the way how that case was handled. And it's not an old case. We're talking
2023.
Right, 2023. It's not an old case. It's a fairly recent case. Well, it did go to the Court of Appeal. That's how, to some extent, this is the level of the ruling as well, right? It pointed out the holes in the framework. And I guess I could kind of see why, I guess the people on the ground, they might not necessarily know what's best to do. And this is where you could argue the situation needed to be cleared up. And then also, even if you kind of use the workarounds using the common law plus the what's in the legislative provision for noise pollution, if you try to use what exists right now, it's kind of janky. I don't know to what extent it'll hold up in court very well.
But it did.
I mean, I know it did, but depending on the circumstances, depending on how the circumstances may vary.
Okay, what I will say, this is what I think they are suggesting. What the Court of Appeal is suggesting is that the EMA, let's say, rather than having this any other law, that is too vague and too imprecise. And they need to include, specifically included in that is any offense coming under public nuisance. And once they put in that into the major act, because the noise pollution rules tells you the decibel levels and all of that and how you have to get the application and all of that. But in terms of relief and remedies, the problem with the EMA, they did not have the power to shut it down, which is what they did. They could have abated And she's saying abating means stop the music. But the problem was that it does not clearly give them the power, because it does not clearly say, included in the definition of, in the definition provision, included in the definition of noise pollution is the public nuisance. And once public nuisance was included in the definition, there would be no need to do this workaround, because they could have then immediately relied on the public nuisance. And a clear remedy provided for a public nuisance is to abate the source of the nuisance. And abating means to shut off the music, because they did breach the variation that they were permitted by the EMA, but the problem was, and that is how the Court of Appeal worked around it. So they're saying that's unsatisfactory. We shouldn't really have to be doing all these gymnastics to say that, that they couldn't rely on the EMA Act per se, but it does allow you to go and apply other laws. It shouldn't be that.
To some extent, I think Court of Appeal, from my point of view, you could argue the ruling didn't necessarily have to go that way. Is that fair to say? No,
I wouldn't say that.
You wouldn't say that?
No,
okay.
I wouldn't say that. Because what it is that, I think to pursue any other remedy which may be provided by law. So any other remedy provided by law is the Public Service Act, which allows, and remember the enforcement officers are also special reserve police. So they could invoke the Police Service Act Section 45, which allows them to abate the source of whatever the breach. There's also the Summary Courts Act Section 70. But that is unsatisfactory. So what she's saying, and what the courts are saying, we shouldn't have to do that type of, because she knows the EMA was wrong to shut down the music. That's why they shut down the party. It's not that they stopped the music,
Right, they shut down the party.
And they do not have the power to shut down the party.
Right.
But they could have had the power to abate, which means to shut down the cause of the noise, because of that provision that says allows them to use any other remedy allowed by law. And what she did is apply the Police Service Act and the Summary Courts Act and the tort of public nuisance under subsection C. But what she's saying is it shouldn't be so unclear. We should specifically provide that noise pollution shall include public, the tort or the public nuisance, shall include public nuisance, and then define public nuisance in the Definition Act. So she's saying the EMA was wrong to shut down. She said the EMA, if they had abated it and stopped the music, that section 68C, any other law would have saved them. But they did not just stop the music, they shut down the party, and they had no power to do that. But she's saying, or the court is saying, it's 3 judges, so I shouldn't keep on relying on Justice Lucky. What they're saying is the section C allowed them to apply any other law, and any other law does allow the EMA to abate the source of the nuisance. So what they could have done, and what they did not do, was they should have shut down the music, which abate the source of the nuisance, but not shut down the party.
Right.
You got that? So
yeah.
She's saying now that it's time now for the EMA legislation to make it very clear that when they talk about noise pollution and the noise pollution rules that apply, that included in that definition is the public nuisance and any other law relevant there to whatever the people who draft legislation will put it in. But that is what is missing, and that is what should be there, rather than having to go to C, which says, and any other law which may be applicable.
So technically,
yes,
as much as
I feel like doing a classroom thing, man.
Yeah, well,
what are you? You are the slow student, the bright student.
I am the slow student.
No, I am the bad teacher.
No, I'm the slow student. So based on what you said, while I could see where it's not the ideal situation and needs to be rectified,
right?
At least from my surface level understanding, the EMA needs to stop saying, well, it's a police problem, because the ruling basically sets the precedent in common law that we can't do this through this
But it's
avenue.
highly, it's not what you want to do. You want to be making it clear.
No.
And what they did is they didn't shut down the music, which is a
Yes.
bait in the source,
Yes.
which you could have under
So,
this section,
but-
the shut down effect.
Right, but my point is,
Which they didn't have the power
while,
to do.
while the court is saying we don't really want this to be how it's done,
Yes, that's what they're
while
saying.
the legislative body is
Yeah.
not fixing the situation,
So you have the ruling.
right, to some extent, isn't there a duty of care to the population to utilize this precedent in the
Well,
interim?
yes, of course. This is what has happened. This is exactly it.
And I think
So-
this is what the caller essentially was pointing
Yes.
at, because he said, look up nuisance, right?
Yeah, so as it stands now, unless Wild Goose goes to the Privy Council and the Privy Council rules other than what the Court of Appeal has decided, it means that that is the law as it stands, so that
Right.
anybody, they cannot shut down a party, but they can shut down the music.
And but the court is saying,
If they are
yeah.
not, if they are in breach of a variation, which they applied for and obtained, because that's what they did. They have 10 days in which they could apply for variation on the decibel level. They were granted the variation, but they breached that variation. What the EMA cannot do is shut down the music, shut down the party, but they can abate the source.
Although,
of
I
it.
mean, we do know
Well,
that.
that's what we're saying. and
Yeah.
that's what-
But the point is, technically you're not shutting down a party. Now I will say this.
You are shutting down the party.
One of the
There's a
other
party without music.
I know, right? Especially in Trinidad and Tobago. One of the things that has always been on the table as well, because part of nuisance, I think, is you could get relief privately as well. Like, say, if there's a bar that's regularly making noise, you could take them to court on a civil matter, right? Here's the problem
But there
with
are
that.
exclusions, There are exclusions. We could, and you have to go to the act. It's like, what is the exclusion? Like religious ceremonies.
Right.
If you have a sports day, there are a number of exclusions.
I will
in the
say
act.
this. I will never forget on Diwali.
I wanted to deal with gambling,
I just want to say this on Diwali, because you might say, why will a religious institution? No. I have seen a church try to disrupt Diwali celebrations in the Arima town hall because the church was right next door, and there was no congregation. They were just cranking their volume as loud as they could.
Right.
So there's
So
all
what
of the
are we
things like
taking
that.
out- What are we taking out of this? As the teacher in me, what we are taking out of this, and what Justice Lucky and the other judges have said, the EMA legislation needs to be amended to specifically provide that included in the definition of air pollution is the public nuisance. And once they do that, that will get, and then they also then in the provisions that give enforcement, they should specifically provide for abatement of the source of the nuisance. That is the things that they are looking at, and they're encouraging the legislators to do that. In the meantime, it's the appeal court who made that ruling, so unless it is overruled by the Privy Council, which I'm not sure that's ever going to happen, in the meantime, that is the position.
The importance
You
of
want
this
to
is
tell me
that
again? Oh.
the importance of this is that corruption and criminal activity is suppressing any current attempts to enforce this common law ruling. And I'll just say that. I have heard stories where people have dealt with reprisals when they've tried to
That's
make
a whole
complaints.
different, that's a whole different
So this,
ballgame.
but if we allow it to fester, it's only going to get worse. All right,
Well, that is
gambling.
true. Okay, I just want to say very briefly because, and that's one of the things the Prime Minister talks about delay. Yeah, it's delay. It's called the Gambling and Betting Control Act. Now, I will say this. When in 2007, before I joined the government as a minister, it was early 2000, and I think 2005 or 2005 or 2007, when Mr. Manning, as Prime Minister, said that he was closing down these casinos because they were private members clubs that were effectively operating casinos, and we know it's not a matter of thing that is not any secret that is one of the main sources of money laundering, and we certainly have a lot of problems with transnational organized crime in this country. So there was a big outcry, and whoever owned those businesses, the billion-dollar owners, set out their workers and with their babies and said that how, put a lot of pressure on the government. So Mr. Manning, I think Conrad Neal, I hope he doesn't mind me calling his name, but he was the one that was facing the music at the time, said that we would then put in a sunset clause and give you, I think, 3 years to shut it down. He was shutting it down. So what has happened is that legislation that would have been passed, well, we didn't stay the 5 years. when we had a 3/5 majority. So they have on the books the Gambling and Betting and Control Act. Of that act, which was 2021, it was only 3 parts have been proclaimed, part 1, 2, and 10. Now, when you say proclaim, it means you can now go from being passed as legislation, and the president, some legislation does require proclamation by the president to bring it into force. And so we have a delay if you cannot enforce it. And why can't we enforce it? Because since 2021, it's sitting down, and I think in some GSC. But what I do know, these are the parts that cannot be enforced. The part 2 allows for the setting up of the Gambling Control Commission itself. That's what it does, and so on. But what it doesn't do, an appointment of a CEO. But then you go to part 3, which is not proclaimed, which is obtaining a gaming betting license from the commission. Part 5, betting, prerequisite granting of a license. So that can't be done because they're not operational. They're not operational. Part 6 is taxes and funds, payment of taxes. Part 7 is enforcement. And under enforcement, in particular, section 68, and that's the one that's the most troubling, at least for me, and it should be troubling to all of us, is that it says that anyone operating a casino now, because you have a casino, you have the betting shops, you have the pool, pool you call them? Where you go and do your pool?
Pool halls?
It's pool halls? Okay. But they're really the casinos they're after.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I've not seen any major
yes,
betting.
it's the casinos. And you know, when Minister of Finance, I've said it so many times, when he gave, I think, his first or second budget, he said Trinidad and Tobago has the most per capita size of our country, the most private member clubs in the world. And these private member clubs operate as casinos because they're licensed as such. But what they have now, so all of this is not enforced. None of it is enforced. None of it is enforced. None of it. And not apart from that, the enforcement part, and I want to talk to section 68 in particular, you have to get the consent of the licensee to inspect and enter the premises. Now, please, you figure out what that means. The whole concept of surprise is obviously not there. Or, under section 69, if they won't let you in, you have to go and get a warrant from a magistrate, and you have to give him all the reasons why you should be allowed to enter the premises on these specified grounds. So that was not the case in the original version. It was you were allowed to enter, because that, if you get warning in advance, isn't it obvious that if you are in breach or you're involved in activities that might be considered be part of money laundering or some other illegal activity, would you let me in? No. And the CAC saying, you can't let me in. If I say you can't come in, the Act section 3 says, you can't, you have to get my consent. And in the meantime, if you have to go and get a warrant from a magistrate, don't you think that if I had anything that I didn't want you to see, I'd get rid of it? So the whole element of surprise has been taken away. And apart from anything else, only most of the legislation has not been passed. And so we still continue to operate under the private members club. And we still have proliferation. I think at the time in 2007, they said it was 75 of these clubs operating in casinos. It's over 100 and something by I know that by now. And it seems that the government is delaying and maybe obstructing. I don't know. I have to ask the Prime Minister that question. But it looked like delay and obstructing, because that is a source that is money laundering, and that is white-collar crime. And that's one of the major causes of transnational organized crime in this country that is recognized as being a major cause and source of our crime situation. So maybe the Prime Minister should do his best to stop the delay of such an important legislation, as well as the National Statistical Institute. And what I'm not speaking about is what I spoke about already, the campaign financing legislation. Maybe he should do his best. He has all the time now. And also passing the regulations for the refinery. If you had to close down the refinery for 7 years and you didn't pass the regulations, what's the hurry? Pass the regulations and let the procurement regulator deal with it. What's the hurry? What's the hurry? Let her deal with it. Don't you like transparency? Don't you like accountability? That's what you said, why you couldn't support Hart, because he said you stand for accountability. Well, walk the talk. Instead of just talking the talk. So that is what I wanted to talk about today, the issue of the nuisance, which one of your callers brought up. So I hope I have responded to that. And the Prime Minister, as usual, not taking responsibility for the delay. Yes, it falls right in your lap. And if you were successful, I think you would take the praise. If you're not successful, I think you've got to take the blame, or a large portion of it. So that's it for me. I'm not going to deal with the Economic Advisory Board issue because it's gone after 9. And it's a lot of information to digest. What you say?
It's too much information for me.
What?
I'm tapping all the done.
Where were you last night?
Where was I?
At a party?
Actually, no, I wasn't.
Okay,
no,
all right.
Listen, I'm getting too old for that, you know. That's not entirely true, but you know what I mean. No. Actually, speaking of that, I knew there was
True story, right?
KISO going on last night, but not in the Savannah. The KISO finals and freestyle,
right.
but not in Savannah. Then apparently there was something else going on in the Savannah. Then also, it's Tuesday, so there's a certain artist. I don't know if he had his event on Tuesday or not. I'm not in the know. But my point was...
There's a big... Yes, you mean Marsha's one thing?
No, not Marsha. Well, I don't know who it was. All I know is that for the last couple of weeks, traffic has been a bit heavier, right? We spoke about this, I think, maybe last week.
Well, we have to understand
and
that to an
for the
extent,
first time in 2 to 3 weeks on a Tuesday, the path was clear. So I don't know how many people took today, took work off today.
I mean, but it's good for the country. One of the problems people have brought up actually is the Prime Minister. I mean, you know, the Prime Minister, you know, I have to give it to him, you know. he says, he reminds me somewhat, and I don't mean any offense, only that he says things that worrisome. He said that we're spending too much money on carnival costumes. But I am sure I saw him in a carnival costume jumping up with a young lady. I am sure I saw him doing that, right? So what he should be concentrating on is getting the taxes, making sure the bands pay all the taxes, all of these parties to pay the taxes because there are plenty parties and they can, and plenty vets. I saw him in a costume. I know, and with him on the front page.
Careful now, you might be reminding him of things he might not want to remember.
Don't worry, he doesn't. Listen,
You know?
You don't want to realize by now that the Prime Minister does not have a problem with any of these things. He says what he wants to say, and he hopes that we'll now, this is what he wants to happen. We'll forget about how bad the crime situation, they have to use a SOA. He'll forget about the economic situation with diversification. We'll forget about the National Statistical Institute. We'll forget about transfer pricing. We'll forget about the gambling. We'll forget about the campaign financing. We'll forget about the refinery. We'll forget about all that and talk on television and everywhere about how he play mass too.
I mean, you said it, but we'll open the phone lines now. We have Digger Martin in line. I might take a break in between, but Digger Martin, you're on the air. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, Sean, and good morning to the Honorable ex-Finance Minister. Listen, the man has 50 million to spend.
Which man?
Carnival is not an issue. He could basically sponsor a whole band with women in it.
That's true.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, that's true.
But let me get serious. I have a heavy heart when we as a country whining and jamming. We had 3 years ago 4 persons lost their life during Carnival, the pariah deaths. The Prime Minister came back from seeing the Ayatollah, supposed to have had a press conference, and he ran away from it. I suppose he didn't want to answer question. We have the diver who is lost for 40-something days well services. Why are we leaving his body for the fish to eat for bait? We have now the Coast Guard lost, and we're trying to find them. And added fuel to the fire, we have the Nikon issue. How, as a people in this country, we could allow our government and state organization to get away with that? We are heartless, and we have to pin that on the CEO of the country, the Prime Minister. He has 50 million to spend. The best thing to do with spending that is to give them something to satisfy the needs of the children to go to school and things like that. I would have done that. And I think that is a moral responsibility for him, despite the court actions. Do something that is amenable to society. Do something that you show that you are craving government. The other issue, I'm coming to quick. You see that those scanners? Yes, they might serve some purpose. But remember Latinta, drug hall, did it pass through report? We have, as the downtown president says, protect your border. You trying to deflect and saying scanner and thing, but you leaving a good track for Mr. Big to do all this nefarious activity. You remember the drug Scott report? 53 police were suspended. They came back into the police service and they were elevated to the executive of the police service. And I'm going to jump back on my favorite topic, the day of policing. What happened is the same thing too. Unless we fix the judiciary, unless we clean out the police service to the nefarious police officers and that, we're going nowhere fast. So you have to give the DPP all its prosecutors. You have to move away that notion that some of the judges is partisan to the ruling party. You have to fix it. That is where we have to fix. The police, to me, I am not an expert here. If the police can function properly without political nexus, then we have to fix that first. That is the first thing. Despite the core problem is the government, but you have to start somewhere. We are people, we will decide on the government at some point in some time. I'll go and have a nice morning.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that really does touch me a lot is the pariah issue and how they were treated there. It is very painful. It's this thing that they put under cover without any rain falling and then, you know, for a few days and treated God-given information. The whole situation up to now, you can't give them an ex gratia, which means that you are not admitting liability as long as the matter is going ahead. But these are, it is unforgivable on the part of the government.
I would say this is one of those times when you are trying to treat it as though it's something more ordinary than it is, and it's not.
Delaying again, delay. Who's delaying?
And to me, it shows part of leadership is making the tough decisions and not caring about, well, what if I look bad? Well, sometimes you're not supposed to care if you look bad. And if you are genuine, you wouldn't care that you look bad. And more importantly, if you're genuine and actually good at what you're doing, eventually the public will acknowledge and appreciate that.
Yeah, that is beautiful.
I'll just say this quick. I do want to speak about the two other situations that he mentioned, but I'll say this about the unfortunate situation in the Coast Guard. That poor Coast Guard officer, he probably died when the ship sank. It is what it is. I guess you could argue about recovering the body as soon as possible, but I don't think there's any person to rescue at this point. Now, I could be wrong, but the odds are not...
It's a recovery.
It's a recovery, right? So then now it's a combination of... It's not just expense. You also have to weigh in how much risk do you want to take trying to recover a body and put other people at risk.
The lady just had a baby, but you know, if you notice in those that exercise, you notice that the international entities were involved in that exercise.
Of course, you do.
Right. Just remember that.
The last time the Coast Guard intercepted a boat, somebody got shot.
International entities are always involved in
we have San Fernando on the line. Good morning, calling on here.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Good morning, Karen. I have to say to Karen, thank you very much for explaining this issue, this noise pollution nuisance issue, better than any media ambassador from the police service. Because they have all of them, wherever I looked at them, they have not been able to do what you did this morning.
Oh, thank you.
Now, as you talked about the pariah diving, the tragedy there, I want to focus this morning on that issue with the Coast Guard officer who apparently was inside a narco submarine and apparently lost. Well, they can't find him, so at this stage, you know what happened.
Yeah.
What my issue is, Sean, with this is that there is no information. And this is the problem that I have in this country, where the authorities need to provide information, not only to the family, but to the public. All we know is that this incident took place 55 kilometers off the coast of Trinidad and Tobago. 55 kilometers where? West, east, north, south, southeast, southwest, northeast, we don't know. They have not given any information. And I think it's time we decouple the Coast Guard from the Defense Force. We have a Coast Guard, a Navy masquerading as a Coast Guard. We don't need a Navy. We need a Coast Guard. I think it's time they demilitarize them and bring them into a law enforcement agency because it's not making sense anymore as far as I'm concerned. This whole issue with the Defense Force needs to be looked at. Just how Karen went on research and came back with these answers. Look at the Defense Force and see, is this serving Trinidad and Tobago? What do we need to do to fix this? And I think one of the points is to decouple the Coast Guard from the Defense Force and make it into a proper Coast Guard and not a Navy, because it really is a Navy that they call a Coast Guard. So we need
let's explain it. Could you explain the difference? Because I'm not understanding the difference.
I think I know where he's going, but if Mr. San Fernando.
Yes, because.
Caller one?
I hope he's
Are you
still
there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, if you could explain.
What did you mean by that?
Yes, what it is that you're really getting at, because I want to understand, and I hope I'm not the most foolish person listening to you.
No. A Navy is a military organization, which the Coast Guard really is, as part of the Defense Force. A Coast Guard is a law enforcement agency, but not a military agency. So the laws that govern it would be different. It would not be military law. So that is what I mean by that. And the state will have, we wouldn't have to have all these expensive apparatus that they buy to go, those big ships that they buy. We don't need that. We just need our Coast Guard to defend the coast of Trinidad and Tobago. Even the things of retirement age, the hierarchy, all those things would change. The training would change, and I think it would be better for Trinidad and Tobago if we had a Coast Guard rather than a Navy, because the Coast Guard that we have now is actually a Navy, because it's a military organization. I hope without going too deep, I hope that explains it to you, Karen.
Thank you, caller.
But I think we have a bigger problem really now, I think, as you're talking about the lack of opaqueness. Is somebody calling?
No, I will say this though. The size of vessels we use, I think, are comparable to the size of, say, the U.S. Coast Guard. But with regards to how it's structured and what its mission seems to be and how it operates, yes, it seems to operate too much like a military, whereas it should be operating primarily more of our law enforcement as well as our maritime patrol for search and rescue. That's essentially what the U.S. Coast Guard's mission is.
Yeah.
It's not meant to be a Navy. Meanwhile, we have a Coast Guard. The size of vessels might not be the problem, but maybe the how it's equipped might be the problem, right?
Or not.
Or not, right? And then, of course, yes, the structure and it being part of the Defense Force. And honestly, caller, when you said that, Mr. San Fernando, I'm looking at the whole, what is the point of the TNT Defense Force? The Air Guard, for all intents and purposes, don't have enough assets to operate or exist. I don't know. I mean, having a few cargo planes or transport planes that are
about 19 of them left.
Right. So technically, the head of the Defense Force is the Vice Air Marshal, which is essentially someone from the Air Guard that is a one-star flag officer, like a general or an admiral, right? Okay. So like, I don't even understand why the Defense Force exists, because it's not as though, it's not like we're the United States and we have the Joint Chiefs of Staff and we have like 5 military branches. We essentially have 2 and less than a half if you count the Air Guard. And one of them isn't really a military entity like how the Defense Force, and We had this discussion, I think, last week, Karen.
Okay.
The regiment's mission also, like what do we have a regiment for? What is it meant to do to justify its existence? There are things that we could put, we could organize it, we could restructure it so that it could be useful to us. But as it stands right now, we don't need a set of soldiers who just are soldiers to just stand there and do parades.
And we are not criticizing the soldiers, eh?
Right, the system, it's archaic. We inherited a regiment or 2 battalions, and we just said, oh, we have a regiment now. Well, why?
Maybe that made us feel like a real nation.
The thing is, there is usefulness. There is missions that these entities can do, but they're not really doing it, or at least if they're supposed to be doing it, we don't see the results. So that's why, while I might disagree with some of the minor details of what Mr. Swanson said, for the most part I agree with him. Why do we even have a head of a defense force? We have 2 entities and civilian leadership. We don't need like a middle manager to oversee that. It makes no sense to me. Right? And I do wonder if we have the Air Guard guy leading the defense force, maybe that's why the Coast Guard or the regiment isn't really operating properly. There's more we could say. I've monopolized the time, but we do have a caller, Dabadi, is it? Sham Flair. Oh, sorry, my bad. Caller, good morning, you're on the air.
Yes, good morning to Karen and good morning to you, sir. I just wanted to make a comment on the noise pollution discussion that you had earlier. Now, most of that discussion and legislation is slanted from the view of the homeowners or the people located nearby where these activities are going on. But I want to take the discussion to, if I paid my $800 and go to one of these events, and then the organizers, for reasons unknown to me, raise the volume way beyond the decibel levels permitted, the Fed gets shut down, and I know who pay my $800. What recourse do I really have against these Fed promoters? Because I do agree with them raising it over and beyond, right? I mean, I didn't pay my money for that, but I paid $100 to go and enjoy a party, only to hear in the middle of it all, they shut down the music. Well, you know, it's only one kind of people who can dance without music, but I am not one of them. So, what recourse do I have?
Okay, let me just answer him. Because, he's making a... and thanks for your commentary, because there is a difference between private nuisance and public nuisance. When you're dealing with private nuisance, you have to be the owner of the land, and the other person, when I say owner, either in legal occupation, whether it's a tenant or licensee or whatever, but it's land you're dealing with, and the other person who is being affected by your actions has to also be the owner of land. So when you're dealing with private nuisance, it is land-based. So if you burning tires on your land and it's the smoke coming over at my place, if your sewage is being escaping from your property, there's a famous case called Rylands and Fletcher, which is supposed to be, but I don't want to go into the whole set of law, right? But the point is, private nuisance is land-based. Public nuisance is affecting the general enjoyment of the persons in the area. So whether it's a school, a hospital, or a residence. And that is where the difference lies between the two.
We have a caller, but I just want to ask quick. Can you do class action lawsuits in TNT?
That's right, and yes, and that's the other thing.
Right, so...
you could do a class action lawsuit.
We'll get to that, but we do have San Fernando in line. Good morning, caller. You on here?
You're on the ball.
I just had one more point to say, Sean, before I went there. What was increasingly worrying, and that seems to slip the media, that we have those narco submarines carry up to 10 tons of cocaine. And that was in the vicinity of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
It worries me to no end to understand what is happening around us. Where was this submarine going? Was it coming to Trinidad and Tobago? You know, that is because you normally see that going to the U.S. and to the West Coast or the East Coast of the U.S. You normally see that's where you see those submarines when you see those documentaries and stuff. but that the Coast Guard intercepted one in our waters.
Okay, God, I will want
It's
to...
frightening.
Well,
it is frightening to think that. That's what I wanted to get across.
And Mr.
Thank
San
you.
Fernando, I am
Yes,
quite sure you're not the only one who has had that thought. A lot of us have thought exactly what you have said. And I think what is being underplayed, among other things, is that the fact that international agencies playing a role. So if they, for example, I don't know if you remember the one with the Spanish captain who found cocaine tied to the back of his boat. Well, under international law, he would be in trouble. So he had to report it to the customs and so on. It wasn't they that did that. It was he that did that. So when you are hearing about these, I think, and I'm taking a chance here, because I can't, it's early days for Trump. I do not support Trump. I'm all for or against. I don't want to get my visa pulled. But what I will say is this, that he is, I don't know if you know, he's a teetotaler. He absolutely does not drink any alcohol. And that is, I think, partly his brother was an alcoholic and died of alcoholism-related illnesses. So he's very much anti-drugs. Now, those drugs, as you rightly say, coming down from Colombia and Venezuela, are going to the United States and Europe. I suspect under Trump and this SOFA that we have also in place, I suspect that the international agencies and using their intelligence are using a far more active role and putting pressure on the government or whoever it is to intercept these vessels, shipments that I think are carrying narcotics. And the death of that gentleman is very worrisome. And I think if there's one thing I would say in favor of Trump as of today, is that if he's committed to ensuring that his country is not flooded with more drugs, which they have a big problem with, then he's going to commit resources to the ensuring that the drugs do not disrupts the trade, not get any big fish, disrupt the trade from Colombia and Venezuela coming down to United States. That's what I think is the only positive, and I think you see an example of that was just played out. And by the way, as I'm on that, the SSA, there is a lot of disinformation, misinformation in concerning that SSA. And it did trouble me. I am no lover of Euler here with Christopher, but for the newspapers to carry an article about what could happen and what they could do and what they could charge her with and what all of this speculation when nothing has been done, it is clearly done to absolutely destroy her reputation in the public domain. And there's too much that is tied back to the SSA. That Howard was the young man that was killed in January 1st. I then read, yes, but now I read, I thought...
The lawyer.
Yes, Hector. Yes. I thought, Randall Hector, I thought that he had been a legal advisor, but they said he was continuing to advise them, the SSA. And from every report, he's supposed to be a very upstanding gentleman. That other one with the one they killed on, who was the administrator, the ICNTT, and then the Prime Minister coming out and giving wrong information about his stockpiling things at Komodo, and then you read in an article, they moved it because, look, there's too much, and they're saying that she was getting the snipers for the SSA. All roads are leading to that SSA, the best. They arrested and had to let him go twice, right? Earlier, Christopher, well, it's an arrest because she couldn't leave, right? And they had to let her go. It is too much of a conspiracy, and the conspiracy that is going on that I do not have the answer to that, but it's not good, and it's not good for the country.
With regards to these submarines, just very, very quick
all connected,
glance. They could reach all the way to North America. Normally, they're offloaded, and fast boats are used to then do the final leg to get them to shore. But the point is, they could leave Colombia. About approximately a third goes to the Pacific, a third goes to North America, goes to America, and the last third they can't account for. And the
Europe, it doesn't go to Europe?
Well, maybe. I guess at that point they can't track it, right? And probably some of that last third comes up the Caribbean, maybe to go to Europe or not. It potentially now going through the middle of the Atlantic might be a little bit riskier. But potentially you do have the range because they have apparently a whole logistic things with refueling and fishing boats, keep lookout and pass on information and supplies, refreshments, food and water and all of that. Like I said, refueling so they could loiter. And the point is they could invest so much into this because they both submersible and semi-submersible carry potentially up to 10 tons. And they say that's 200 million US wholesale. Right? When sold to the US, 200 million wholesale for a 9-ton load. So they will invest in all the kind of fancy things, right? And so what does that mean for us? It means that, you know, stuff is probably coming through that we probably don't even know about.
And I think things are going to heat up more with the interception of these drug or suspected drug shipments. Now that Trump, who I am not, I know there's someone listening to me who's a big Trump supporter. Oh. We don't want to start him up. He's listening to me right now. But in any event, I am saying on that issue of the drugs, which really is the cause of our transnational organized crime, is at the source of our crime, and if we can get, if Trump is going to help us with that, then I support it.
The whole thing with the trade war with Mexico and Canada, it kind of lightened up when Mexico said, oh, we'll put troops on the border to deal with the smuggling and the illegal immigrants and all of that.
What about the tunnels?
Right? So I'll just say this, who knows, the American government might say, hey, if you all don't buck up now, you all might get some tariffs too. You all might get some extra stuff going on.
I feel we'll deal with that issue with the, you see how they went with the sofa amendment?
I could see.
Yes, what can you see?
I could see where, like you said, things only seem to happen when international agencies are on board, right? But we have to question now, at some point those agencies are going to get fed up and say, we have to babysit you 24/7, you know, to get things done.
It is in their interest. Listen, nobody does anything, and that's the nature of humans and countries and nations. If it is in their interest to stop the shipment of drugs, which is a major cause of an issue in America, and Trump, I think, takes it personally, they are not going to get tired. And I don't know if you know that they had set up in Barbados, I can't remember the name of the organization.
I think so.
And they had some huge
yes. Drug holes.
Huge drug holes.
The US Coast Guard had 2 within the last year.
And remember the one that they had in Trinidad, and they let it come on land, and people asked, why did they let it come on land? And they only arrested them when it was in a car in Trinidad, but the international agencies had been given the intelligence. So it gives us no choice but to follow through when they give you information.
Yeah, I'm just saying, they probably would like that, you know, the things that they're not directly involved in, we would at least give a show of some effort.
But we do give a show of some effort.
I don't even think we do such a basic job. We don't. We don't.
Okay.
No, we don't. The Coast Guard is never out at sea unless, you know, they're never out at sea. To the point where people complain when they call because they need the Coast Guard. It's like the police. The police have no cars or they have no fuel for the boat.
Remember the one in Tobago? It
sank. Yeah,
and it's a little like, it looked like a fishing boat. And remember Tobago said we landing a pirogue?
And that was the when Farley said he was going to get pirogues for the Coast Guard, he was entirely wrong because he was like, well, that's all they give we, so that's what we're accustomed to. And we don't even have that, so at least I'm trying to get that from our people. Now, I just want to say something quick with regards to the question for the caller. If you are a patron and they shut down your party because the party organizer raised the volume too much, that's why I was going to class action lawsuit. It might have to reach to that point. Yeah. The other thing is, of course, if party promoters are irresponsible and they run afoul of the law, at some point the public are going to basically have to do their due diligence and say, I'm not going to that man's fete no more because he on nonsense, right? And the thing is, though, this is where it gets tricky. And this is where, if party organizers want to do it on the cheap, you're probably going to get at that problem because they're going to have maybe they're going to have a limited number of speakers in a single location. They're going to try to crank the volume so that the music covers the entire fete. and you're going to get what you get, as opposed to having a properly designed sound system that could easily cover the venue without relying on massive amplification. And that might cost more, that might require better expertise, a more expensive company. I don't know, I've never put on a FET, so don't quote me on that. But I know something about sound systems, and I would say proper design would potentially help you without having the decibel levels get out of control.
But I guess at the end of the day, a class action lawsuit could be done, especially since the appeal court has ruled, and you have a certain time by which to appeal to the Privy Council. And if they did not appeal to the Privy Council, so far as Wild Goose is concerned, that is the end of the matter, and the appeal court's decision would stand. So you could do a class action lawsuit, and you only need 1 or 2 examples, and everybody will get the message. Because,
yes.
I mean, you know, it's a commercial enterprise. It's a win-win situation if you do it right. But at the end of the day, they need to make money, and nobody's against that. But if you're not going to make money because, one, you are going to have your party shut down, not shut down, the music shut down, which is effectively shutting down the party.
So it's both. If it only takes 1 or 2 lawsuits, and then all of a sudden you won't have to worry about that part of the problem. And it only takes the authorities, whoever they may be, when they're determined to decide who amongst them will actually do the job, to enforce the law for the party promoters to get the message. But we do have way too much low-level as well as high-level corruption. But the low level is probably, you know...
Well, the low level is all allowed to operate because the high level operates.
Right.
So it filters down. So everybody has to get a piece of the action. You mightn't get 10 million, but you get 10,000.
We take the low level for granted. So it's easy to say, yeah, that's why we tolerate the noise pollution, I believe, right? Because we think it's a low level problem when ultimately, as you would say, it's not. So thanks to the callers for calling in.
And thanks for giving us that question. I really appreciated it. And I said, you know what, that's a good question to ask, especially during the carnival period. So thank you for asking me the question. I hope you were listening. And even if you weren't, well, I'm sorry you would. What can I say?
Of course, thanks to the good lady for joining us and doing the relevant research. I still don't exactly know what's going on.
What are you saying?
It's a joke. It's a joke.
It's not a good joke, huh?
I guess.
All right.
I'm a bad student. I'm not a lawyer. My father wanted to be a lawyer, but you see, this is a case in point. It probably would have been a good idea. Folks, make today a good day, as Mr. Shah would always say. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Stay safe, and even if you don't like the person that is coming at you walking down the street, it's still nice for you to be nice to them. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day 1 when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there, next in staff. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have 2 of the 3 species of anteaters right here.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk